The silence was dense, not the kind of quiet that followed a pause. This was heavier. It clung to the walls, to the expensive furniture, to the thick carpeted floor beneath Dorian's polished shoes. It was the kind of silence that came when powerful men realized, too late, that they'd made a mistake. A costly one. Richard leaned forward, slow, measured. His arms rested on the desk like they were negotiating with gravity. "That's unacceptable," he said. His voice had dropped an octave. On every level. Dorian didn't blink. He didn't need the apology. He didn't come here for that. What he came for was harder to give. Harder to fake. "I came here for a business conversation," he said evenly, voice controlled. "What I got was a reminder." Richard's brow creased. "Of what?" Dorian met his eyes without flinching. "That there are still rooms where respect is conditional. Where recognition comes second to appearance. Where being on the schedule doesn't mean being seen." A flash of something behind Richard's eyes, shame or irritation, surfaced and vanished just as quickly. But he didn't respond. He couldn't. The second executive, older, silver-haired, shifted in his chair. He opened his mouth, but Richard stopped him with a quiet gesture. "You're right," Richard said. "There's no excuse. And I won't insult you by offering one." There it was. The line. Measured, rehearsed. But this wasn't theater. Not anymore. Dorian looked past him for a second, to the framed accolades on the wall. "It's not just Linda. Or Melissa," he said. "It's the system that taught them I didn't matter." And there it was again, something shifted in the room. The atmosphere tightened. Richard sat back, absorbing the words like a blow he'd seen coming too late. "I want to make this right," Richard said. "Not just for today. I mean it. Whatever needs to happen, internally or otherwise, it will." Dorian let the silence stretch again. Longer this time. The kind that made suits sweat. Then he nodded, barely. "Then fix your culture." Richard gave a slow nod, and the weight in the room settled between them again. "Let's talk about your loan," Richard said finally. "Personally. Today." Dorian gave him a faint smile. "We'll see." But this wasn't about numbers anymore. This was about something else. Something deeper. And he wasn't the only one who knew it. The meeting ended. Dorian walked out without shaking hands. His shoulders were tight, jaw clenched. The hallway outside the executive floor was sleek and empty. Cold. A woman in a pencil skirt, Melissa, stood by the elevator pretending to check her phone. She looked up. He looked through her. The elevator doors opened and closed without a word. Outside, the city hummed with energy, indifferent and loud. Dorian lit a cigarette with steady hands. It had been 6 years since his last one. He exhaled slowly. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. "Yeah." A breath. Then a voice, distorted, low, familiar. "You were seen." "I expected that," Dorian said, watching a Blacktown car idle across the street. "No plates. They weren't supposed to call you in." "They didn't." Pause. "Then who did?" Dorian didn't answer. The call ended without goodbye. He didn't go home. Instead, he went to a small, nameless bar tucked under the L tracks. Nobody knew him there. That's why he liked it. A man was waiting in the corner booth. Thin. Nervous. Looked like someone who wore secrets like skin. "You're late," the man said. "You're early," Dorian replied. They sat in silence for a moment. Then the man slid a flash drive across the table. "Everything you asked for." Dorian didn't touch it. "Tell me." The man's voice dropped. "You were right about Melissa. And Linda. They're not just gatekeeping. They're laundering requests. Filtering access. Filtering people." "For who?" "Names you'd recognize. But that's not the worst of it." Dorian tensed. "They flagged you," the man said. "Internally. You're on a list." "For what?" The man leaned in. "For being unpredictable." Dorian laughed once. No humor in it. "That all?" "No. There's something else. Something off in the financials. Richard authorized a loan guarantee last month, but the money never landed. Paper trail ends in an offshore shell." Dorian went still. "Who's the beneficiary?" The man hesitated. "It was sent to an account, tied to your name." His blood went cold. "That's not possible." The man shook his head. "It's worse. The timestamp on the transaction was logged during your last overseas trip. You were out of the country." Dorian didn't speak. The walls felt closer now. The air heavier. "Somebody's setting you up." He took the flash drive. Left without saying a word. Back in his apartment, lights off, blinds drawn, he plugged the drive into a burner laptop. He opened the first folder. Photos. Dozens of them. Surveillance shots of him. From last week, yesterday, this morning, then documents, memos, internal emails with his name highlighted. Terms like contain, neutralize, and reposition were sprinkled throughout. And then video files. One in particular stopped him cold. It showed him entering the building for today's meeting. But the timestamp was wrong. It said Wednesday. Today was Monday. He played it again. Same footage. Same timestamp. Same him. Except, in the video he was wearing a different suit. He shut the laptop. Heart pounding. His phone rang again. Same unknown number. "Who are you?" he demanded. Silence. Then, "They know about the flash drive." "How?" "They put it there." "What?" "You were never supposed to meet that informant. He was already compromised." Dorian's hand clenched around the phone. "Then why send me?" "They needed a fall guy. And they needed the story to look authentic." "You said I was flagged." "You were. The moment you started asking questions. And you're telling me this now?" "I'm telling you to run." Click. Dorian stood in the dark. Everything felt tilted. Off-center. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text. "They're inside." He turned slowly. A shadow crossed the hall. He reached into the drawer for the pistol he hadn't touched in years. Footsteps. Soft. Deliberate. Then a knock at the door, followed by a voice he recognized. "Melissa." "Dorian? I think we should talk." Her tone was light. Polite. But underneath it, something cold. Calculated. He didn't respond. Another knock. Then the sound of a key sliding into the lock. He raised the pistol. Quietly stepped to the side. The door opened. Melissa entered. Alone. No weapon. No bag. Just a folder in her hand. She saw the gun. Didn't blink. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said. "I'm here to warn you." "You've got 30 seconds, Dorian said. "They're going to kill Richard." Dorian froze. "What?" "Tonight. After the board meeting." "Why?" She stepped forward slowly. "Because he tried to fix it. And you're just telling me this. Why?" She looked tired. For the first time, human. "Because I used to believe in the system too. Until I saw what they did to the last person who tried to expose it." She dropped the folder on the table. Inside, photos. Of Richard. Surveillance. A printed itinerary. And a death certificate. His. The date was tomorrow. Dorian looked up. Melissa's voice was barely a whisper. "They've already written the report. All they need now is a body." The weight of it hit him like a freight train. The twist wasn't that he was being framed. The twist was, he wasn't the only one. Suddenly, the building lights flickered. Then darkness. Complete and absolute. Melissa turned toward the window. "They're here." Dorian moved fast. He grabbed the folder, the gun, the flash drive. Melissa backed toward the hallway. "Stairs," she said. "Elevator's dead." "What about your keycard?" "Disabled." "They move fast," Dorian muttered. "You have no idea." They reached the stairwell. Above them, footsteps. Boots. Below, shadows moving upward. Trapped. Melissa looked at him. "What now?" Dorian checked the folder one last time. There, tucked in the back, an address. No label. No context. But something told him it mattered. He held it up. "We run." She hesitated, then nodded. And together, they made for the roof. As they reached the top, the door slammed shut behind them. A chopper passed overhead, low, fast, loud. Dorian turned to Melissa. "You said they've already written the report. Who's writing it?" Her eyes met his. And then the twist hit harder than the rest. "I was," she said quietly. "Until this morning." And before he could react, the rooftop door burst open. 3 masked men. Weapons raised. No warning. Dorian pulled the trigger first. The room hadn't changed, but the atmosphere had. Thick with unspoken things. Tension twisted the air like wire. Dorian hadn't moved from his seat, but something had shifted. Subtle. Quiet. Final. He no longer felt like a guest here. Richard leaned back slowly, his shoulders tight. The 2 executives beside him looked anywhere but at Dorian. Power had quietly changed hands, and everyone felt it. No one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. Dorian let the silence breathe. Then he stood. Not abruptly, not aggressively, but with purpose. "I'm going to say this once," he said. "And I want you to hear it without trying to explain, correct, or soften it." Richard nodded slowly. "This was never about the loan," Dorian said. "Not really." Richard's eyes flickered. A brief moment of confusion or realization. Dorian kept going. "The loan was the pretext, the excuse, the thing that got me in the room. He walked to the window, looked out. The skyline reflected back at him like a wall of eyes. "You think you understand what happened here today," Dorian said, not turning around. "But you don't." Behind him, a chair creaked. Richard was leaning forward again. "Then explain it to me." Dorian turned slowly. "You have a culture problem, Richard. Not a financial one. You've built a machine that only works for people who look like you. And no matter how well-meaning you might be today, that machine will keep running unless someone takes a wrench to it." Richard didn't speak. "You offered to fix it," Dorian said. "But I'm not here to wait and see if you will. I'm here to see if you can." He walked back to the table, placed both palms flat on the surface, leaned in. "I'm not just another applicant," he said. "I've been watching this company for over a year, talking to your people, listening, collecting stories." Richard's mouth tightened. Stories like Melissa's, like Linda's, like a dozen others who said the same thing in different ways. One of the executives finally stirred. The silver-haired man. "You're saying this was a setup?" he asked, voice low. Dorian met his eyes. "I'm saying this was a test." The man sat back, stunned. Richard stared at him, trying to read past the words. "You set us up?" "I gave you the opportunity," Dorian said. "You failed it." He turned, walking back to the head of the table. Sat again. Calm. Composed. "Now let's talk about the loan," Dorian said. For a beat, no one moved. Then Richard exhaled, slow and deliberate. "All right," he said. "I'll play." Dorian didn't smile, but something flickered behind his eyes. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a folder. He opened it, laid it flat, and slid it across the table. 15 million, Dorian said. At 4.5%. Secured against the equity in my holdings. Standard terms with 2 conditions. Richard didn't touch the folder. Which are: 1. Full internal audit of hiring and promotion practices. Done by a third-party firm of my choosing. Richard blinked. That's not standard. It's not a standard deal. The silver-haired executive shifted again. And the second condition? Dorian turned to him. You step down. The man froze. What? You heard me, Dorian said. You resign. Today. Richard looked between them, stunned. Why him? Dorian's voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. Because he signed off on Linda's termination. Because Melissa named him directly. Because every single employee I spoke to, every one, used the same word when they described him. He paused. Fear. The room went silent again. But this wasn't the silence of discomfort. It was the silence of truth. The silver-haired man's face had gone pale. You don't have the authority to demand that, he said, voice thin. No, Dorian replied. But I have the leverage. He gestured to the folder. You want the loan? Clean house. Start there. Richard looked down, at the folder, then back at his colleague. Frank, he said softly. The man, Frank, was already shaking his head. You're not serious. But Richard was. And that was the moment it all changed. Because Frank stood, pushed his chair back, and walked out without a word. The door clicked softly behind him. Dorian leaned back, folding his hands. One down. Richard watched the door for a long moment, then picked up the folder, opened it. Pages rustled as he skimmed. Numbers, terms, clauses. All solid. All real. This is a good deal, he said. It's a fair one, Dorian replied. Richard looked up. And if I say yes, what happens next? Dorian tilted his head slightly. Then we start fixing what's broken, he said. Together. And for the first time, Richard believed him. He nodded. Signed. And just like that, the power shift became permanent. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Dorian stepped into the elevator alone. The folder clutched under his arm. The doors slid shut in silence. Down 31 floors. He didn't exhale until he reached the lobby. Outside, the city roared. Traffic. Sirens. Horns. He pulled out his phone. One message waited. Unknown number. No text. Just a photo. He tapped it open and froze. It was a picture of Linda. Taken today. At a distance. She looked afraid. Behind her, barely visible, a shadowed figure. No face. Just a shape. Watching her. A second message popped up. She knew too much. You just made it worse. Dorian's pulse spiked. He looked up, scanning the street. People walked by normal, unbothered. But something felt off. Cold. He moved quickly to the curb. Dialed a number. Lisa, he said when she picked up. We have a problem. The FBI agent's voice came fast. Talk to me. Someone's following Linda. A pause. How do you know? I just got a picture. No ID on the sender. Forward it to me now. I'm tracing it. Dorian sent it. A heartbeat later, she said, Got it. This isn't random. They're watching your movements. Why? Dorian asked. Lisa hesitated. Because you kicked the wrong hornet's nest. What does that mean? It means this isn't just about your company, she said. Or even the loan. Another pause. We've been tracking a network. Old money. Political ties. Influence stretching across state lines. Dorian's breath caught. You think Richard's company is part of it? No, Lisa said. I think it's just a front. And then she said it. The director. Dorian froze. The director? Lisa's voice was barely above a whisper. We don't know who he is, but he's pulling strings everywhere. Judges, executives, even law enforcement. Dorian's blood ran cold. You think he knows I'm involved? I think he's watching you right now. Silence. Then she added, Get somewhere safe. We'll meet in person. No more calls. The line went dead. Dorian stood still for a moment. Let it all sink in. This wasn't about corporate culture anymore. This was bigger, darker, more dangerous. He looked at the photo again, zoomed in. Behind Linda, the shadowed figure was clearer now. A symbol barely visible on the jacket. A serpent curled around a key, and under it a single word, Dominion. Dorian's hand tightened around the phone. Whatever this was, it wasn't done with him yet. And he wasn't done with it. He turned, heading toward the alley. Somewhere quiet, somewhere hidden. Because from this point on, the real war had begun. And it wasn't about business anymore. It was about survival. Dorian stood, still feeling the weight of his last words hanging in the air. Richard's uncertainty was a palpable thing. His silence was telling, the look in his eyes almost desperate. Do you understand now? Dorian's voice was quiet, but it carried the sharpness of someone who'd seen enough, done enough, to know when the game was over. Richard didn't answer immediately, and that silence spoke louder than any words. Dorian could see it, the internal battle raging within Richard. The man was torn, caught between maintaining control and the dawning realization that he was losing it. The other executives had filed out earlier, the room now reduced to just Dorian and Richard. Richard had closed the door behind them, but the tension was thick, suffocating. The room felt smaller, as though it was closing in on them both. I didn't expect you to agree with me, Dorian said after another pause. But I do expect you to see it. He watched Richard closely, as if searching for any crack in the man's armor. Any sign that he truly understood what was at stake. Richard's gaze dropped to his desk, his fingers lightly tapping the surface. A nervous gesture. Dorian could see the wheels turning, but Richard remained silent. Dorian's eyes narrowed. You can't fix the system by focusing on the people in it. That's what you're missing, Richard. It's not about who's sitting in the chair. It's about the chair itself. The culture that allows this to happen in the first place. Richard's head snapped up, but it was too late. Dorian had already drawn the line. Until you fix that, Dorian continued, you'll never fix anything. Not the loan. Not your reputation. Not even your company. His voice grew harder, his words cutting through the tension in the room. Richard took a slow breath, his eyes searching Dorian's face. What do you want from me? His voice was raw, almost pleading. Dorian smiled, a tight, humorless smile. I told you. Accountability. Not just from you, but from everyone who sits at this table. Richard's face hardened, and he finally stood, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. You're not getting a deal today, Dorian. Not now. Not like this. Dorian let him speak, watching the man squirm. Richard had made his choice, and it was exactly what Dorian expected. But the game wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Dorian crossed the room and stood by the window, his back to Richard. You think this is about money, don't you? He asked, his voice low and controlled. You think that's all this is? A loan. A deal. Numbers on a piece of paper. Richard didn't respond. You couldn't be more wrong, Dorian continued, his words heavy, each one deliberate. This is about principle. You can't buy respect, Richard. And you can't buy loyalty either. Not from me. Not from anyone. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Richard stood at the desk, his eyes burning with frustration. But Dorian could see it now, the cracks, the vulnerability. Richard's facade had shattered. The air felt electric. The tension between them thickened, an invisible battle raging without a word being spoken. Dorian turned back to face him, his expression calm, unreadable. I'll give you a choice. You can fight me on this, fight everything I've just said, and you'll walk out of here with nothing. No deal. No hope. Or you can choose to change. You can choose to actually do what you promised. Richard's gaze flickered toward the door. But then, as if some invisible force held him in place, his eyes snapped back to Dorian. The room seemed to grow colder, as though the very air had changed. "You have no idea how much power I have," Richard said quietly, his voice laced with something dangerous. Dorian's eyes flickered with amusement. "I'm not afraid of you, Richard." Richard's lips twisted into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "You should be." Dorian met his gaze. "You don't scare me. Not anymore." The finality of Dorian's words hung in the air like a weight, suffocating. Richard's eyes narrowed. "You're playing a dangerous game." Dorian took a slow step forward. "I've always played dangerous games." There was a long pause before Richard spoke again, his voice tense, tight with hidden anger. "You'll regret this." But Dorian didn't flinch. He knew this was a line in the sand. There was no going back now. "Maybe," Dorian replied. "But you will too." Suddenly, the door opened behind them. The quiet click of the hinges was like a shot in the dark. Dorian's eyes darted to the doorway. Lisa Carter stepped into the room, her face unreadable, her eyes cold. She didn't say a word as she moved to stand beside Dorian. Richard's eyes flickered with confusion. "What is this?" Dorian didn't answer immediately. He simply nodded toward Lisa. Richard's face drained of color as realization hit him. "What the hell is this?" Lisa stepped closer to Dorian, her presence like an anchor in the storm. "You thought this was just about business," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "But it's about so much more than that, and you've just stepped into something you can't walk away from." Richard's gaze darted between the two of them, panic creeping into his eyes. "What are you talking about?" Dorian's expression remained steady. "It's about power, Richard, and the people who control it. People like me, like Lisa, like those who've been watching you. You thought you were the one in control, but you're not." The color drained from Richard's face as everything clicked into place. "This was a setup." "From the start." Dorian nodded. "Welcome to the real game, Richard. You're not playing against us anymore. You're playing against yourself." Lisa's lips curled into a cold smile. "And you've already lost." Richard's eyes widened as the walls seemed to close in on him. He staggered back, as if trying to find an escape. But there was nowhere to go. The walls were too high. Lisa's voice was calm, almost too calm. "You thought you were safe. But you're not. Not anymore." The weight of the moment pressed down on Richard like a physical force, his breath quickening, his face contorting with panic. Dorian stepped forward, his words final. "The real question is, Richard, are you ready to face the consequences of your choices? Because they've caught up with you. And this time, there's no turning back." As Richard's back hit the wall, his eyes flicked from one person to the other, a flicker of recognition of defeat. The air was thick with anticipation. But then, a sudden noise. A sharp knock at the door. The moment shattered. "Come in," Dorian said without hesitation. The door swung open. But what came next was the last thing Dorian expected. The figure who entered wasn't a face he recognized, yet the familiarity in the eyes sent a chill down his spine. The room went dead silent. The person spoke one word. "Time." And just like that, everything changed.